Well, good morning, Hawaii. Thanks so much for tuning in here this Aloha Friday. I'm Ryan Kalesuji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii. Today, Yanji, we continue on in our conversation of how COVID-19 is impacting various sectors in our community, and we're going to be talking to one individual who leads one of the largest companies here in the state.
That's right. We're so happy to be joined by Peter Ingram, who is the president and CEO of Hawaiian Airlines. If you've been out to any number of spots, perhaps your favorite beach, or if you've taken a drive through Waikiki or any of the more touristed areas, you'll notice that we do have a lot of visitors here relative to what we've seen throughout the pandemic. So we want to welcome Peter Ingram, and thank you so much for being here this morning. Let's start off with this influx of people we're seeing. I'm curious to know from the airline standpoint, are you seeing the profile of the visitor change? Who's here right now?
Good morning, guys. It's great to be back with you again. And we definitely are seeing demand showing real, true signs of recovery in a way that we haven't seen since the pandemic began. Really, over the past 6 weeks, we've seen bookings pick up. Our traffic levels, now that we're into March, are higher than they have been for a year now, and our flights are running regularly with load factors in the mid 60s range, some days into the 70s. That contrasts with just back in January, we were running a smaller schedule and only about 40% full. So definitely seeing more visitors. The traffic is coming almost entirely from the mainland U.S. International hasn't really started yet, so it's definitely a more domestic visitor base than we've had. I think it's a little bit younger right now, but I think that is going to continue to evolve as more people get vaccinated, and particularly because the vaccinations are available in most parts of the country earlier for people who are a little bit older. I think over the next few months, we're going to start to see the 60-year-old and 65-year-old traveler returning to the mix as they have the opportunity to get vaccinated and get back into the world.
One of the concerns as we began travel again was just educating people coming to Hawaii about the Safe Travels program and the protocol needed for testing. From what you've noticed, are most of the guests arriving aware of the pre-travel testing? Do they have those tests in hand? And have there been any sort of mix-up in communication, or are people generally responsive to what the state is asking for these visitors coming in?
Yeah, the communication is a challenge. I think we've been doing a pretty good job of that. And if you look at the numbers of how many people are coming in who qualify for the pre-travel testing exemption, for visitors, it's typically running about 90% of people have been able to get their tests and complete the forms and get through it. Our returning residents, our percentage of completing those tests and forms is still running a little bit lower for all the carriers, probably more in the high 50s, low 60s range. So I think we're doing okay on awareness. I think that the process is still a little bit cumbersome. The Safe Travels website is a little bit difficult to work with. There's a lot of questions, some of them that aren't maybe as relevant, and I think we could look at streamlining that and making it easier for people. So we would like to see it evolve to be a little bit more guest friendly for as long as Safe Travels is with us, and we're still working to make sure people understand when they do come here what the protocols are, particularly with regards to mask wearing and distancing, and trying to make sure that we address those awareness issues for people before they get here to Hawaii.
Well, on that point, we know that you've launched new routes to Florida and Texas, and a new destination in California as well. Can you tell us about what went into the thinking of why these destinations in particular? Is it just were these routes planned before the pandemic and now you're just getting to them, or is this something that you've specifically realigned because of the shift in the visitors?
Yeah, they're routes that we were looking at before, but we didn't have firm plans to launch any of them. And I think the the circumstances that have aligned is we've got aircraft availability because we expect that for a period of time we're not going to see full demand return to all of our traditional routes, and particularly right now on the international side, we're really still in the starting blocks on international travel and could be there for a little while. So we looked at a couple of things. There's 4 new routes we're launching over the course of just about a month. 3 of them have already started. The 2 of them I would put in the category of right in the wheelhouse of what Hawaiian Airlines does, and really is consistent with the 2 cities that were already on our map. We were serving Long Beach to Honolulu, but adding the first connection nonstop in there. Southern California, south of Los Angeles, a little more convenient for people who are either in Long Beach or Orange County instead of having to fight the traffic on the 405 to get to LAX, and convenient for people here in Hawaii who want to go to Disneyland. Ontario opens up the inland area of Southern California, again, making it more convenient for people who live a little bit further inland and don't want to fight that drive into LAX. We're giving them a more convenient market. The other 2, one is launched, and that's Orlando, Florida. So this is the first nonstop flight between Hawaii and Florida on a scheduled basis. It was one of the largest markets for travel between Hawaii and a city on the U.S. mainland that didn't have nonstop service. So that obviously bubbles up on our screen of looking at new routes. It has demand from both sides of the route. So Orlando is a popular destination for people here, either going to Disney World or going for kids playing in sporting competitions. Orlando is a popular city. And so we're excited about that, and it's off to a good start. And then next month, we're launching a flight to Austin, Texas, which will be our first flight in Texas. Again, it'll be the first nonstop between the city of Austin and Hawaii or Honolulu. And Austin's another growing city, a lot of businesses moving in there on the technology sector, and so it gives us a chance to get into a market that's already large, but we can stimulate it with a nonstop flight. And we're excited about all these, and we're keen to make sure they all work and become a long-term part of our network.
In the time being right now, of course, the states of Florida and Texas have made some headlines because of COVID and their restrictions or their lifting of some of the mask mandates and things of that nature. Does that concern you at all about opening it up to these routes? And is there any sort of education that's happening to those guests that may be coming from areas like Texas to ensure that Hawaii does have a mask mandate? What sort of policies have you folks implemented to make sure that that communication is coming across?
Like all of our routes, we'll make sure that we do the best that we can to communicate to people what the expectations they should have when they come to Hawaii, and what the regulations and policies that are in place. That communication is never perfect, but we'll endeavor to get that out. I think most of the people who are coming here really are willing to be compliant, and they're just looking to get to a place where they can enjoy being outside in the sunshine, enjoy the beach and everything Hawaii has to offer. And so we're not really expecting any problems there. We've had the mask mandate on our flight for many months now, long before there was a federal government requirement. We've been requiring it. By and large, most people understand it and they appreciate it, and they want us to continue that. We do have the occasional guest who continues to push back, and we've had to develop protocols to deal with that. But those remain very much the exception and not the rule. And hopefully as time passes, we won't have to deal with as many exceptions, as people just start to understand that this is the way it has to be for now.
Mm-hmm. We have a question here from Arnold, which is sort of twofold. What do you think about having the testing and quarantine requirement for inter-island resident travel lifted with proof of full vaccination. Let's first talk about the inter-island testing requirements. We had the governor on Wednesday, and it doesn't sound like they're making any moves to change that anytime soon. I would love to know your thoughts on perhaps lifting that. And then let's talk a little bit more broadly about vaccine verification or the vaccine passport concept. What are your thoughts on that? So let's start with inter-island.
Yeah, starting with inter-island, our view, and I've shared this with the governor and the mayors and other public officials, is that the circumstances now are very different from where we were in August when we reimposed the requirements on neighbor island travel, and specifically that put a quarantine in place and then required testing. We actually think that neighbor island travel should be opened up, removing the requirement for testing and not replacing it with vaccines, but just allowing people to move freely within the state. And if you think back to August when those restrictions went in place again, it was a time when we were having over 300 cases a day in Oahu. The positivity rate was far higher in Oahu than the rest of the state. If you look at the data now, it tells you that Oahu is more in line, almost entirely in line with the state average. We really don't have those circumstances in place. There are not a lot of the cases that are still existing are really almost entirely community spread. There's not travel related cases. It's more associated with congregate settings. Air travel has been very safe, and we think freeing people in the state to be able to go and visit friends and family on other islands makes sense right now based on the data and based on the science.
And to follow up, sorry, on the passport, this vaccination passport, if you will, what are your thoughts? Do you think that is something that could realistically happen? And from a logistical standpoint, how would that be implemented into what you folks have set up thus far?
Yeah, I think for long haul travel, we do understand that there are differences outside of Hawaii and the level of virus that is still existing in other communities. And so we expect a testing requirement to be in place for some time. And there, I do think the next logical step would be allowing people who have had their full dose of vaccination and the requisite 2 weeks after that for the vaccine to take full effect, to be able to avoid testing requirements if they can provide proof of vaccine. The biggest impediment to that is probably the logistics of verifying that you have had your vaccine. People who have had a vaccine, they've all got a little white piece of paper that shows that. There's really not an easy way to validate that, I understand, by uploading it into the Safe Travels application. And so we may have to look at pieces of paper for some period of time. There is a lot of talk about development of a green passport or a green pass or a vaccine passport. There's various names around for it, for people to demonstrate either that they've met the testing requirements or that they have been vaccinated. We would support that. We've actually, with all the other airlines, have encouraged the federal government to lay out a set of standards for what such an application should look like, so that private developers could go and do their magic and develop the software, develop the applications, so that communities like Hawaii could use it. And hopefully we'll get to a point later in the year as vaccines become more widespread, both throughout the United States and internationally. We really need to look to a world long term where we get past these restrictions, and domestic travel is something that you can do without having to go through some sort of border control process. And on the international side, whatever requirements are accomplished through Customs and Border Protection, as we were, just back 13 months ago.
On that international question, Kahele said, oh, no, that's not the one I wanted. This one. Sorry. The comments are coming in so fast. Kahele asked, any idea when international routes will reopen? I know this probably changes week to week, but what is the trajectory for that? And when do you think, what routes do you think will open first?
Yeah, so we are flying a couple of international routes now. We do have flights into Tokyo and Osaka and into Seoul. There's more cargo on those flights than there are people on those flights right now. There are ways for people to qualify for the Safe Travels program. There's travel partners that are testing partners that have been identified in Korea and in Japan. The biggest impediment there is the restrictions on the other end of the route. So someone flying from Tokyo to Hawaii and back right now, you can do it, but you'd have to, over the course of your journeys, get 3 tests, one before you leave Hawaii, and then another one back on your arrival, all at your expense. And so it is physically possible, but it's really impractical financially for people to add the cost of 3 separate tests to their journeys. What we need in place for that to be more accessible for people is for the restrictions to start being relieved in those other countries. Japan, for a period of time, had a state of emergency in place. They've just removed that, but the travel restrictions are still pretty substantial there. Korea may come along over the next few months, and as they get vaccines distributed. Unfortunately, some of these countries are behind the United States in terms of vaccine distribution, and so it may take a little longer before it really is flowing freely. And then Australia and New Zealand, who have really take an approach of being very, very restrictive in terms of travel. We think it's probably at least the end of the year before we see any meaningful opening of those markets. So it really sort of varies country by country at this point, and we're monitoring each of those, at least as far as the countries that are relevant to our network.
I want to shift the focus now to just the company as a whole. As you navigate through this time, we know that in the conversations that we've had here on this platform a few months ago, you expressed some of the concerns that you had from a financial standpoint. At one point, I think you said you're losing close to $2 million a day. Where are you folks at right now as a company financially, and the viability and stability of things, with more people, of course, flying, but overall, how is the financial structure of the company looking at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started my day today talking to one of our suppliers that we work closely with, and I was giving him an update on the business, and he said, wow, Peter, that is the most optimistic I've heard you in at least a year. And I think that's an accurate description of where we are. With the recovery in our bookings, we've seen our cash flow improve. We're still cash flow negative, but we just released some numbers this week that in the first quarter, we expect that negative cash flow to be at about $1.3 to $1.5 million per day. As bad as that sounds, back in the second quarter last year, we were talking about $4.5 million a day of negative cash flow. We've been able to raise financing, so we're in a position where we believe we've got more than enough liquidity in place to manage through what is left of this crisis. And right now, instead of thinking about laying off employees, we're actually looking at having to ask some of our employees who are on voluntary leaves to come back before those voluntary leaves expire, because we're spooling up our schedule and the bookings are picking up. So we're feeling a lot more positive. There's a wind in our sails that has not been there for the last little while. We know that we've got to be cautious still, that we're not out of this yet. And so much of this has been 2 steps forward and 1 step back. We've got to continue to see the vaccinations win the race against the variants of the disease. But as we sit here right now, we're feeling pretty enthusiastic that we could have a bit of a stronger summer and start to get back to the business of recovering and building back our business for the long-term future.
That is so encouraging. What specific sectors are you looking at beefing up when it comes to hiring? I know so many people love this airline. It's our hometown airline, and they of course work for the airline. So in what areas do you expect to be able to actually grow your staff?
Yeah, so we've called back a lot of people in our airports, and are going to be continuing to doing that over the next couple of months as we add more flights into the schedule. We've got some pilots who have been on longer term leaves that we are going to start recalling for specific fleet and seat qualifications. So in certain of the aircraft types, we're looking at the schedule for the next couple months, and then flight attendants likely as well. So it's really largely across the board. We don't have anybody on involuntary furlough right now. I hope that involuntary furlough are going to be 2 words that I am not going to have to use together again for a very long time. And the folks who are on voluntary leaves, we're starting to bring them back really across the board.
I know that this doesn't necessarily directly, isn't something that you directly manage, but it is impacting the company overall. But we know that there's a lot of development that's happening in around the airport area right now. There's that additional terminal that has been being constructed. There is, of course, that rent-a-car facility that is also being worked on. I mean, for somebody who hasn't been at the airport in a year because of COVID, you might go back and it looks completely different. There's a rail line going through now. What are some of the developments, and is that something that you folks are looking forward to help enhance some of the things that you folks are doing at Hawaiian Airlines with these upgrades that are happening around the airport?
Yeah, some of that's been happening right outside the window where I am right now. So the rental car facility in particular is really blocking the view of the airfield from the window beside my desk. So I'm very well aware of that one, and the rail line runs right beside it. The most important one for us is the Mauka Concourse, which is 12 or 11 new gates, 12 new gates, I believe, that is opening up at the Mauka end of the airport. So closer to Nimitz Highway from the Hawaiian Airlines ticket counter. And that construction project has been going very well. It's on track to be ready to open this fall. At the phasing of when that will actually open, and maybe slowed a little bit depending on how much traffic there is at the airport and whether those gates are needed right now. So the DOT is going to be managing that from a cost perspective. One of the great things about that project is, in addition to the 12 new gates, there is a new TSA security checkpoint set of lanes that is going to be available there. And I'm very excited about that from our perspective, because that's been one of the challenges, particularly at the peak times of the day when we are running a full operation. It's one of the choke points for our guests getting through the lobby and through the checkpoints, and having those lanes available is going to help the experience. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know the exact timing of when rail is going to open up, but I think that may be something that is helpful for our friends who live further west on the island to be able to get into the airport. I think that'll be good for people who work at the airport in particular, who have to endure that H1 drive every day to get to the airport. That's we're looking forward to that being a new alternative for those folks.
You know, in the months since we've talked, we've learned so much about the virus itself, and I think one of the things that kept a lot of people off of travel was this fear that if you were sitting with recirculated air, that somehow, you know, there would be mass transmission. What have we learned about the safety of flying, and what do you tell people as we start to look to summer travel? More and more people being vaccinated and starting to get to reunite, particularly with extended family on the mainland. How safe should we feel, and what have we learned about travel itself, and particularly those 5-6 hours on the plane?
I'm glad you asked, because it's one of the things that I think is still misunderstood. And you're absolutely right. A year ago, we didn't know how this virus was transmitting, and that was one of the things that I think was scary for all of us, is not knowing what we can do to avoid it. One of the things that we've learned about air travel is it is actually, for an airborne traveling disease, as we know COVID-19 is, it's an incredibly safe environment. The airflow on an airplane is really fantastic for a variety of reasons. Fresh air is introduced to the cabin all the time. Any air that is recirculated goes through HEPA air filters, just like you would have in a hospital setting. The air flows from top to bottom in the cabin, and so that keeps it from spreading. Even if you are within 6 feet distance, the airflow is not like it is in a lot of other indoor settings. So all of that makes airplanes a very safe environment, and there have been almost no reports of transmission actually on board airplanes. On top of that, we've enhanced things specifically to add extra layers of protection. That includes requiring everyone to wear a face covering when they're on the airplane. It includes enhancing our sanitization procedures on board the aircraft and in our airports as well, wiping down kiosks and frequently used places, putting plexiglass in place at ticket counters. So we think at Hawaiian and really throughout the U.S. industry, and this is something we've partnered with other airlines on. We don't compete on safety, and this is a safety issue. And so we've shared best practices, and we feel very confident that getting on an airplane, traveling to a destination is incredibly safe, and have no concerns about that at this point.
You know, as our time wraps up here, as we close out, I just wanted to ask you, you know, as a leader of this company, what is something that you've maybe learned through this time of COVID-19, something that maybe you didn't anticipate and really was made more aware of after this whole process that you have had to lead this company through? What is something that maybe surprised you or that you learned through this entire experience?
I don't know if it was new learning, but it really has reinforced a couple of things that are going to stick with me for a long time. One is how important it is to communicate. And I think that's true in all times, but I think it's even more true when you're dealing with something about which there is so much uncertainty, and you know, finding ways to talk to our community, to talk to our employees, and letting them know what we know, being open and honest with them. When we don't know, telling them we don't know, but what we're doing to find out. That's been very helpful to keep people aligned and moving in the same direction. And then the other thing it's reinforced, and I knew this before, but it has never been more true, is that we've got an incredible team of people at Hawaiian Airlines, you know, from our leadership team through our front lines. Everyone has pulled together and looked to figure out how they help, how they make sure that we guarantee that our company is going to survive this challenging period and be in a position to succeed going forward, and keeping our focus on taking care of our guests. And it's been gratifying to be able to work with a group of professionals who really are the best in the business and make us all very proud.
Well, Peter Ingram, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's great to hear that the airline is doing well. This is such an important lifeline for so many in our community, and we really thank you for all of your time this morning.
Thank you, guys. Great to be
Thank
with you, and aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Well, Ryan, well, wonderful to hear that they're actually getting to call people back to work, that we're seeing, he said we're seeing planes around 60, perhaps even 70% full, which is something that we did not expect to see this soon. They're still losing money at a pretty great clip. However, when you compare it to where they were, close to $5 million a day and now down closer to $1 million, that is a big difference, and hopefully that they continue to have more success. And then also that point about the safety of air travel and just really getting that message across that that is a safe place to be, provided that the proper protocols are being enacted.
Yeah, and that's a message that, of course, we're not only hearing from Hawaiian, but from other air carriers and through other media outlets and research that are studying this, because they recognize the importance of travel and having that safe and that safety that's through the air filters and all the other practices that go on there. So him, be really going into depth about how they're making efforts to ensure the safety of those passengers. Also interesting to note just the profile of the visitors that are coming to the islands. The majority, as he's saying, are coming from domestic travel from the mainland. Of course, we know the challenges that international travel still presents with testing that is required on their end, and all the differences that each of the different countries require for their own travel. So a lot of the market right now is being driven by this domestic travel from the mainland, and these expansions of these new routes to places like Florida and Austin are ways in which Hawaiian is looking to help to continue that growth in those areas.
Right, and you heard him call for wanting to lift the requirements for inter-island travel. That's something that the governor seemed somewhat reluctant to. Someone we're going to be talking about that in more depth will be Lieutenant Governor Josh Green, who's going to join us next week. We're also going to be talking about that vaccine verification with him. That is a major challenge. The governor, when he was on Wednesday, said that he's going to be specifically talking to the White House about that on next week. And that's something that they've got to figure out, because as Peter Ingram said, right now it's just a piece of paper, obviously hard to verify, easily forged, and something that they want to be able to figure out. Do they do some kind of a green passport? Is it an ID card? Some way to verify that people have indeed been vaccinated, so that we can get to a place where we don't have to require testing or quarantine or what have you. So we look forward to talking to Lieutenant Governor Josh Green about that. He'll be joining us on Monday.
Yeah, and also, to add to that point, we hear, and it looks like, if anything, at some point, the resumption of neighbor island travel without that testing would be allowed beforehand. And it's something that we've talked to many of the mayors on this program about. It's something that they support, but the governor said that he's still going to wait on that lifting of that quarantine period or that testing for neighbor island travel. We'll wait to see what happens there. Another person who may help to influence the governor on those decisions will also be joining us next week, and that's Dr. Libby Char. Of course, she heads up the Department of Health. We'll be talking to her about the vaccine rollout, where we're at as a state, as we continue to see more different, more classifications be allowed to get the vaccine, and overall how the state is doing. We saw a slight uptick in the past few days of these cases. Where is the disease in the community? How are the variants being treated? All those questions we're excited to talk to Dr. Char about next week, Wednesday.
That's right. So be sure to tune in on Wednesday at 10:30. Of course, join us Monday, 10:30 with Lieutenant Governor Josh Green. We hope you have a great weekend.
Aloha.